Caitlin Sullivan. Welcome to the show. Caitlin is an expert in AI for customer research. I am so excited because, as I was telling you, Caitlin, just a second ago, I have not had an AI for customer research expert on the show ever. So, this is a first. What does Caitlin do? Caitlin trains growth ready product and design teams to know their customers faster. I'm so excited to talk to you about like what that means and how you do that. So Caitlin, welcome. First, I'll let you just say a few words because otherwise people don't think that there's anybody on the other end and I'm talking to myself.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, what that means, I think I'm still defining that myself because it feels like such a funny new role to me. So yeah, AI training teams to use AI for customer research is it feels in some way like doing what we've always done if we've done customer research, and now we're just trying to supercharge it. But I'm also sometimes working with teams to see what does this look like if it's really AI native and if we don't start with just the way that we're used to working, but start from scratch as if we're starting today. And that's, I think, even new for me to kind of think in that direction. But most teams aren't really ready for that anyway.
When you say like what does it mean to start from scratch? What does that mean? Like when you start from scratch with research or when you start with from scratch with this tool
With this new set of tools, I mean, if we
set
think
of tools?
of things that are completely new to the toolbox that we have to work with, like AI moderation tools, the world of possibilities is very different than it was if you're in a SaaS scale up that, has been doing customer research with some, within an organized team or a product team that does this in some sort of continuous discovery format for the last 5 years, right? They've been doing things still in a kind of traditional way compared to with AI, where if we have the ability to collect data in a completely different cadence without us being there, what does that look like if we start with that as the framework instead of going, oh, we're just trying to kind of speed up the way that we used to do things.
Mm, that's interesting. All right, we're gonna dig into that and how I'd love to hear like about because you've been testing these tools and you've been learning stuff, and I'm gonna want to ask you what have you learned. I haven't tested it as many tools, I'm sure, as you have, but I've learned a thing or two as well over the past like last year going into this year. So I am excited to talk to you about that. Clients, I just want to mention that Caitlin works with some brands that you may or may not have heard of, such as YouTube, Spotify, Ramp, Meta, and Canva. Um, no big deal.
Some of them, to be clear, some of those were like I came in and did some sort of training for the team, and some of them are the companies that students in my Maven course have come from. But
Makes
sometimes
sense.
there are full teams in my course as well. So I'm kind of
Yeah,
working with people in different ways and different formats. Yeah.
that's awesome. So I wanted to bring you on the show because I've been exploring the role that customers play in helping companies build to their next level of growth. And so this obviously matches very well to that. I think that like leveraging customers in your growth efforts is a huge opportunity. I still think that. I think it's even bigger going into 2026. I'm also a customer researcher. I typically focus on positioning, messaging, go to market strategy. So, product research, very important, helps you build better. Customer research helps you sell better. And so, that's a lot of the work that I do with my clients. So, let's jump into it. Okay. What do the companies that you work with and the people that are coming from those companies into your Maven course, those people too, right? What do they need help with? Like, what is it that they're coming to you for? What do they want the most?
So these days, when it's all around AI, it's so just to compare with last year a little bit as well, because I think that's relevant. And I feel like there's been a pretty big shift between mid 2025 and where we're starting off now in January 2026. That
Tell me
mid
about
year,
the shift. Yeah, what
yeah,
is the shift you're noticing?
I would say mid last year, it was still so much about what can we trust? What should we be using? Which tools are best, right? Um, and little bits of, kind of questions about how can we use the tools that we have better and things like that. There's still a bit of that, but I think that the conversation has shifted to a more intermediate to advanced question, which is how do we make this standardizable and repeatable? How do we build systems instead of just copying someone's prompts out of their library, hoping it works for us? Trying to remember where we saved that prompt next time we want to do something similar. And it's less, can we trust it or should we be using this at all? And it's more, we're all bought into using it. We need to be using it in a lot of kind of industries, or you won't get the next job. So I'm, starting this year, ending last year as well, I'm primarily helping teams build systems, kind of think beyond the one-time use or the spontaneous ad hoc sitting down in your chat window with whatever large language model you're using and kind of like just coming up with the request on the spot, and more helping teams think about the outcomes they're trying to achieve and how to design a system with, linked tasks or agentic workflows and things like that that will get them there anytime they face a similar scenario.
I love that because that's the way that I approach my customer research work. Like I have a repeatable methodology, and I think that most
Yeah,
people that do this work probably also have a repeatable methodology. And it's like,
for sure.
first we start with a business question. Like, we don't start with the research. What is the decision that the business needs to make? Then we design the interview system. Like, who are you going to talk to? So that you actually get to insights and what truly matters versus what doesn't really matter and is just noise. Then you run those
Yeah.
deep buyer interviews. What are the questions that you like? What are the list of things that you want to cover? Um, then
The
you synthesize the patterns, right? Go ahead, Caitlin. What were you going to say?
the thing that I think is really interesting though is that someone like you or me or pretty much anyone I work with can kind of lay out those steps that you do. When I force someone to look really closely and take just one of those steps, like when you are outlining an interview guide, when you're going to do buyer interviews or something, you start kind of pulling apart the little bits that are the weak links, like the things that someone knows they're an expert in just because you've done it so many times, but has never actually reflected on it. So
Mm.
I've also worked with a lot of really expert researchers, and one researcher who I worked with last year did some training with their team, explained it as like vibe researching. Because when I said,
Oh
you
gosh.
what is your, what is your standard? How do you define what good looks like? What do you want to get out of this? What should it look like? What would be an example of something great that came out of a similar process that you did and that sort of thing? It was really, really hard for her to define that. And she was like, I don't know, maybe I'm a vibe researcher. Like, maybe I've just done this for so many years that I just do it kind of on autopilot. And I think to get really, really good at using AI in cases where we are absolutely an expert at doing that task, and also in cases where we aren't as much of an expert, we at least need to have this ability to reflect on what good looks like. What context do we have stored in our brain somewhere that we would need to download for whatever tool we're using? Those pieces are becoming so fundamental. And the people who struggle to use AI most are the ones who are struggling with that component.
Reflection. They're
Yeah.
struggling with reflection. So are
And
you
and the observation, I think, of the way you actually do it if you pay close attention.
Mm, I see. So then is your recommend because I have a method, right? And if I were to reflect on it or observe, like, really, I think the most important part of research is, what did you find that's an insight? And then what's the decision you're going to make based off of that? Like, those are the two hardest pieces. How do you define what is an insight? And then how do you tie that back to the business outcomes and making decisions for the business? So if I were to reflect on the first one, is this something that you like talk to people that go through your that when you're training, right? I'm just curious. Like, it's a really good question. I even tried to train a founder on doing this work, and it was really hard because it's
Yeah.
not like you can train someone to do customer research in a day, you know? Like,
I've tried to do that too. Yeah, that's kind
you
of where I where I
you've
came
tried to
from
do
too. Yeah.
you tried to do that too, and it was
Yeah.
just like a complete. I tried that last year. And it's because he was like, "How about I want to DIY, right? I want to DIY this. Like you train me, you advise me on how to do it, and I'm going to talk to my customers." First of all, I think there's a problem with that because customers will not really open up to the CEO about a lot of things. You kind of need an outside person, right? And second of all, it was just like pulling teeth because I listened to it and I was like, oh no, I would have done it completely different. And there was like jumping from this part, this section, and then based on the answer, like for whatever reason, he went to a completely different section and it was just not cohesive and all over the place. And then what insights can you get from something sloppy? You can't, you know?
Hmm.
So it was a
That's
waste of time.
definitely that's one part of the problem that we're dealing with AI, right? Because product teams, design teams, also research teams are kind of dealing with this feedback pile, a huge set of folders of all of the stuff that's ever been done in their discovery work, but it's been done by different people of different levels of skill and all dumped into some kind of machine together and treated as equal bits when it's not all equal, right? And unless you kind of think through, well, how would I tell the machine to deal with this stuff versus that in terms of weighting or just acknowledging that this was done by experts and this was done by someone running their first interviews with customers or something like that. You know, those little bits need to be kind of considered. But like you were saying, when you are trying to train a founder who's not used to doing customer research, it's tough because in part you or I who would be doing the training also needs to sit there and go, well, why am I cringing? What's different about the way that that person did it than how I would do it? And how would I explain to someone how I would do it and how that's different, right? It's breaking apart those little bits is exactly what you actually need to tell AI now instead of the founder.
Okay. So that is something that's hard and that's needed, and maybe it's not for founder DIYing, but it's more for now that you're working with these tools. Is it to like help them understand your process and like what does good look like from your perspective?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
To me, it is. Yeah. If I'm training anyone to try to do customer research tasks with AI, like
Yeah,
that's what it is. If you have a decent process in the first place, like if
right.
you're an expert at something or pretty decent at something and you're trying to hand it off to AI in any capacity, that's basically what it's about. Like,
Yeah.
how do you do things? What's good about it? How do you explain that to AI
Yeah.
in a way that it will learn it and actually be able to not just follow a blueprint, but understand how to replicate it in different scenarios based on the kind of principles you've taught it.
Right. So here's what I think is happening in companies. And I didn't know we'd spend so long on this question. Like, what do people need help with the most? And we kind of went on a tangent, and that's kind of how it works with me on the show. But um, I feel like companies have people that are doing research, and it's okay. But then if you layer on top of like just okay and not really an expert in that, and then using tools and not knowing how to use the tools, like that is gonna be awful output. And I'm already finding that like the tool that I was using with one client last year, tons of insights, right? In quotes, tons, too many. I put in a customer call conversation that I did. It gives me 70 insights. What is it? What's an insight then? Like which ones? And then I have to decide like, well, this is this yes, that not. Can you imagine going through one call with 70 insights? And most of them are trash. Like that gives me more work to
Yeah.
do. That wasn't helpful at all. And so I'm just nervous about companies already have like people that had to use their brains without the tools to say what is an insight. But now they're like just dumping the conversation, asking the AI tool to come up with insights for them, and then not using their brain at all because it's like 70 insights and maybe they scrap some and keep the rest. I don't know what's going on. Is that something that is like, do you hear about this struggle?
Yeah, I think it's like, to me, that's kind of among the worst case scenarios, but it's also among the more common scenarios at the same time. But I think what has to be made more clear for more people at this point, with the state of the models that we have right now, they're pretty capable. So when we deal with those issues, like having too many insights, or we see that of all those 70 insights, most of them aren't really valuable, usable, don't give us clear direction, we can't act on them, they're also not verified, then there's something wrong with the system we have in place. And by system, I don't mean like which language model you're using or which, if it's dovetail versus condense or whatever. I'm just talking about the way that humans have thought through the process that you're putting into place and what you've actually instructed the AI to do. So sometimes the blame there is on the people making the tool, the front end tool that's using the large language models in the back end, possibly because all of those tools are basically complex prompting sequences to do tasks for you. And for those of us who are using large language models, if I see a bunch of output that is really garbage in whatever way, I honestly am, these days, I'm not looking at this going, oh, stupid AI. I have to ask myself, what did I just do? What did I just do to get this garbage output? Because I know that a lot of it is on me.
Mm. Okay, that's a interesting way to think about it. When I get garbage output, I'm usually like, you
Yeah.
stupid tool, right?
Yeah.
So maybe like let's say I'm working in Dovetail and I get garbage output, then you're saying instead of yelling at the tool, you go back in there and you prompt for what you really need, right? What you're really looking for and try to like work with the tool to kind of massage the data and make it more valuable for you. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and it depends on the tool that you're using. If you're locked into using a tool like Dovetail and Dovetail does things a certain way,
Yeah.
you have your kind of chat with AI functionality in most of these research specific tools. And you can do a lot with that functionality, to be honest. But then, depending on the tool you're using, it could just really be locked into a certain way of taking your raw data and dealing with it and showing you something that
Yeah.
you might not feel like you have a lot of control over. So, you kind of have to consider what's possible there. But a
Yeah.
lot of the times, yeah, if someone learns solid prompting and like context engineering, you can kind of put that into a chat with AI function in those tools and get a lot better results out of it than what the tool kind of gave you by default
Mm.
with its frameworks and its structure.
So what I'm hearing is like if you're an expert researcher, which you're Caitlin, you are, right? And based on the years of work that I've been doing this, I can consider myself as well. The goal is not to work with tools to make your process faster necessarily. The goal is to be a better prompter. Would you agree with that? Like my goal
I
now working
mm,
with these tools is like how do I figure out the prompts that actually move the needle and in getting me closer to what I need from when I use these tools.
yeah, that's fair to say. I think speed is always going to be the topic though. And I would even say for me, I've talked a little bit about this on LinkedIn, and I think a lot of people resonated with this sense that for me, the one of the most eye-opening kind of results or revelations about using AI for in the best cases for me has been that I can actually generate more complete research, like more complete analysis than I would have if I were just doing solo research on my own.
Tell me more, like
Or,
give me an example because when you say like more complete research, what does that mean?
I mean, I come from, so I was in like B2B SaaS for a bit, and then continued when I started freelancing and consulting. I was working with a lot of startups and scale ups. Time is limited. I was brought in as like an interim head of user research, lead researcher, and they didn't have a research team. Nobody knew how to do research. So I was kind of like thrown in, external expert, but also like integrated into the team very fast to kind of do everything. And so I was usually alone. There was no infrastructure, no frameworks, no proper research tools in place. And if if I were in that position today, it would be a world of difference because at that time, everything was compromises. Like, we need to figure out all of this foundational research fast because it's a startup or a scale up that hasn't done a whole lot of proper, discovery yet. And you don't have time, you don't have resources, but you kind of need to understand the entire customer base really fast or the whole market really fast. And that was always fairly impossible, right? I was like asked to do everything and given nothing. Um, and doing it all alone is really hard. But with I could do that, right? I could actually do more complete research if I were in the same situation today, instead of going, it's just me working a 40-hour week or however much I dedicated to that client. I could actually kind of triplicate myself, have AI moderators do a lot of collection, be able to collect from segments in the audience that weren't willing to plan their schedules to have sessions with me in my kind of time zone hours that I was available and things like that. So you can reach more people potentially. You can have a more representative collection of responses. You can then analyze it all within hours or a couple of days, even if it's a huge amount of interviews or test sessions. So, these, when I say more complete, it's like complete in your ability to assess different ways of testing something in the first place. What my default thinking is when someone says we want to change the pricing for all of our service tiers, I go, oh, we would do it like this. And AI goes, well, what about these other options, right? It kind of broadens the possibilities. So that's a more complete ability to think through the possible solutions in the first place.
That makes
Then
sense.
collecting the data, I can be more complete in the number of segments I cover, the different types of users I'm able to kind of gather something from. Analysis, I'm able to go deeper and broader faster because
Yeah,
if I can prompt it well, I can make sure I'm kind of looking at the data from different angles instead of going, I don't have time. I have
right.
one day to analyze this
Right.
pile
Or
and be
or if you're
done.
just like looking at the more obvious stuff, but there's like
Yeah.
nuances that you might not have considered that might come up and then you're like, "Oh, I never considered that." Yeah, that's an interesting. That are those are some interesting outputs
Or
too.
like the ability, you do a new round of discovery of some kind and you just don't have time to compare it to the stuff that was done 6 months ago to see, is this the same audience? Have they changed? Are they at a different place in their journey? Is this a different segment than the previous ones? Should we be comparing them or not? There was no time to do that kind of next step to make sure that the decisions we're making are based on the most comprehensive picture possible.
Yeah. What did people get wrong? Like, what do you think from just based on talking to folks or what you've seen, what do people get wrong when it comes to customer research?
Customer research generally, I think people still, people still think that more is always better. I mean, kind of like building on the opposite side of the completeness or
Yeah,
the
right. You
opposite
just
side of
told
doing
me
it.
that more is
Yeah.
better. Now I'm confused, Caitlin. What is
Yeah,
it?
I think it's not always the case, but now it's becoming an even stronger kind of side of the argument with AI, right? So that we can do more all the time. But it's not always better. I still think that if you're doing discovery for a new product or a new market, working in a startup, I think the idea of doing things that don't scale and going directly to your customers yourself and things like that are still, they're kind of like the age-old wisdom that I think still very much holds. So,
And this is coming
yeah.
from somebody that's using AI tools to moderate research sessions. So I'm going to ask you what your favorite tools are. I actually wanted to ask you, like, what are you using for what have you used that you've liked for like when you, let's say you can't moderate a session and you need AI to take over because it's a weird time zone and there's no way you're going to match up, right? People that in Australia or Singapore or whatever it is, right? Um, what do you use and what have you found from that? That's an interesting use case.
There are honestly so many tools on the market for that right now. I almost hesitate to say what I'm using. I've like stopped kind of recommending specific tools to people because I think,
Why?
well, so I've had so many clients for training and kind of like implementation support around AI. There have been a handful of times where I recommended a short list of tools that worked very, very well for me and other clients. But then in that particular use case, or based on, whatever markets that company was in and languages that needed to be covered or whatever, it, the products just didn't work nearly as well for them. So
Oh,
I think it's, you see a lot of people, and I do the same thing, posting like your toolkit for whatever. And that's fair. It's always nice to have a kind of a short list of tools that's been vetted to kind of experiment with. But I still think that any company that wants to, for example, extend, not replace, but extend their ability to do customer interviews or tests with AI collection tools, AI moderation tools, should just test them yourselves.
yeah.
Most of them have they're like, you can sign up for free, have a
Yeah.
trial, test them out.
So really we're still in that testing phase because you were mentioning like 2025 to now looks very different in that people aren't questioning whether something works. They're like all in, some teams, right? So
Yeah.
I still question because I've had weird experiences, but after talking to you, Caitlin, now I'm more putting the onus on myself for I need to be a better prompter. So thank you for that. I totally agree with you. But I'm still in the I don't trust you phase.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
still am in that because I don't know. I just don't. Like I use these tools daily, like ChatGPT and Claude for sure. These research tools I don't use daily, but I'm always like, what is this? Why are you're just telling me what I want to hear? And even something as simple as like, I got this hat. Like, what do you think? All my friends hate it. I'm like, what do you think? What do you think, Claude? What do you think, Chat? And they're like, it looks great. I think it looks great because it makes you this, this, and this, and this. And I'm like, can you tell me the truth? Right? They tell you what you want to hear, or they tell you what is logical. And a lot of research is actually emotional. There's a lot of emotion. And that's why I think when I have these conversations with people, and I look for those little nuances of like, well, that was weird because they got a little bit like feisty when they answered that question, or like, I want to dig a little bit deeper. What does that mean? Why did they get so frustrated, or what? So, emotion is a big part. And I think that is lost in AI tools when they're either moderating, because it's not a real person, right? Or when they're pulling insights. What do you think about that?
I think that's sometimes the case, though I did some testing a few months ago with Gemini's kind of new three-level ability to analyze videos. And in previous versions, previous models, all of the tools, you ask any of them, can you analyze a video? And they're like, sure, just upload them. And then they would just blatantly make stuff up. Like the things that Gemini 2 was saying was just had nothing to do with reality, nothing to do with what was actually in the video. So capabilities didn't exist until just recently. And it still doesn't really work for long videos, so we're really limited. But if you upload something like a 15-minute to max 20-minute video, I have had really, really high levels of accuracy in terms of it recognizing what was happening in the scenery and not just the transcript.
Okay,
So
that's interesting.
there were no notes in the transcript. There were no additional notes or any metadata that I included in an extra file or anything. But in a video where someone kind of shifted from a podcast, kind of face to face microphones recording environment to someone sitting on a couch playing guitar, it actually registered that and described the change of scenery correctly, things like that.
Mm.
And we can always argue back and forth whether Gemini's interpretation of someone's emotions when speaking about something are correct. But you and I might also differ on how we interpret someone's facial expression and things like that. So those things aren't set in stone. We have different interpretations as humans. I will interpret things slightly different than Gemini will, but a lot of the time when I just asked it to kind of state what it observed and not the interpretation about what that observation was, just what's the face, what is the facial expression you see on this person? What are they doing with their hands? What is their body position, right? Those kind of little bits of nonverbal language. It was all correct. And I think that's such a big step already to getting them to actually interpret emotions correctly, again, with our context, with input about how we would interpret a person's facial expression. It's just learning then. It's just like, here are a bunch of screenshots of videos, and here's how I would interpret, right? We can apply the same sort of example frameworks with few shot prompting potentially in the future.
Yeah. I think it just all kind of boils down to don't get frustrated with the tool if it's not the right thing the first time around, the second time around, like not what you want it to help you with, and it's, not actually reading between the lines, then how can you train it better to
Yeah,
really add value to your work? And that's kind of like that's what I'm hearing from you, Caitlin. The onus is on us to make this like AI tool plus human person relationship valuable. And it's like helping to teach your kid like values in this world and how to be kind and how to be a good person. Like it's almost kind of like that. Like if you want it to understand what facial expressions or what emotions to that are meaningful and helpful, then you need to kind of train it on that, right? And not
I
just
think
be like,
that's fair to
ah,
say.
this,
Yeah.
yeah. So, because I think a lot of it is like we're using these tools to help kind of feed a lot of information, right? We have a lot of this feedback from customers. Okay, let's feed it into the AI tool and see what it spits back out. But really, it's like, let's help the tool understand meaning, like how to grasp meaning from conversations. I think that's harder. I don't think
Yeah.
that people really know how to do that. Like, to even it's hard for people to understand like what does it mean? What business decisions should we make based on these insights, right? We just talked about. So then you have to like help this tool understand like what is meaningful and what is not. What is meaning from this conversation? That's tough.
Yeah.
If you
And it's
yourself don't know how to find it. Yeah.
it's just not the same for all of us. I mean, going back to, me coming from very often being this kind of one person team or one person internal research advisor or something, that that's also by default a really problematic situation. So, if I were making decisions about how to do research and everything, I mean, I'm making mistakes sometimes too because I'm just one person and I'm interpreting things wrong and I'm, making decisions about what we should do next based on faulty evidence or incomplete pictures of what other people have done before me or whatever. So, I always think too that, well, if you just want AI to do everything for you, that's the same sort of problematic situation. It's going to miss things because partly because you're not able to tell it everything, but also just because it's like it's a one person team now and it doesn't like it's not having anyone else to bounce things with to make better decisions. So I think if part of the overall problem is often how we're looking at AI, expecting that of it, getting frustrated when it doesn't nail things the first time, like you said, not acknowledging that we had a role to play in that, but also just expecting it to do everything on its own. I mean, this has been kind of so overused now, but I do see AI as kind of a partner, some sort of co-pilot, because if I also keep myself positioning it that way instead of going, I'm just going to give it all this work, then I know that the results will be better because it's kind of like two brains together is going to have a better, more well considered result in the end, no matter what
Right.
I'm doing.
Right. No, that makes sense. Was there ever a time, like, can you think of a specific time when an AI, a tool gave you an insight that looked right, but was actually completely wrong? And like, how did you know? How did you catch it? And what did you do after you found that thing? I don't know if there's like any
Yeah,
time that you can think of.
I mean, thankfully, I haven't had to deal with any like really risky situations where I was doing client research and then it happened. Um, but it happens all the time in my testing. And
Like
so
what? Give
for
me an example. Yeah. Hmm.
I've been running, I'm doing a guest post for someone and coming out probably next month. And in for part of that, I generated some new kind of synthetic research results and for some other tests too for the fitness armband Whoop. And so it's a bunch of customer interviews that are kind of based on, patterns that I've observed in other real interviews I had, and then some survey results and customer feedback of various kinds. And I've created those to be as realistic as possible based on their like actual reviews online and things like that. And so I analyze them in a bunch of different ways, see what models do with that. And repeatedly, so the fake research is around whether Whoop should develop a screen for its screenless armband, which would be a really big, really strange, difficult decision for a company like Whoop that specifically made an armband without one. So the results that came out of that in 85% of the analysis that I was running was that yes, Whoop should develop a screen. But because I really created all of that data myself, I know exactly what's in there. And the nuances say no, that it should not, because there are
Mm.
so many other kind of deeper needs, use cases, problems, like all this other stuff kind of stuck together in a web of human, insight, human findings that it's not so simple. And even when customers were like, yeah, I left because Whoop didn't have a screen, they didn't leave because Whoop didn't have a screen. They left because, they're like a high alpine trail runner who actually just needs navigation devices, and Whoop might never ever be a navigation device. It's not about the screen. It's about like all the other things that are hidden behind the screen. So that indicates that actually you wouldn't win that customer back just having a screen. You would need all this other functionality. And that's the sort of insight that isn't like it's not wrong. Maybe within that those bits of feedback, there's evidence that a screen could be valuable for some segment. But is it worth the huge investment to do that, to shift the product completely? That's like a bigger question, and then the evidence isn't so clear in that direction. And I think that's the thing that becomes really problematic repeatedly in all of my tests with lots of different test sets, that AI, if you don't control it, if you don't direct it right, will highlight the things that seem frequent enough to be considered kind of validated patterns, but they're not verified in the sense of digging deeper to understand what's under them and then determining, is this the pattern? Or is the pattern actually something that can be broken up into kind of smaller patterns that are more closely aligned with what's happening in the behavior and that sort of thing?
That's so interesting. And the reason that you were able to catch that is it sounds like you saw the nuances yourself as a human researcher. And then you kind of are comparing that against what the tool is giving back to you. So that's kind of how I approach research today. I'll still do my old way where I go through and I highlight stuff and I write little scribble notes down as I go through the research, the interview, after I'm done with it, like right after it, right? I still do my old way. And then I will use a tool to help me, you know, also expand on what I found. Did I miss anything, right? Does it match anywhere? And I'm just kind of like double checking. That's how I do it. Is that kind of how, cuz that's what helped you catch this flaw.
Yeah. What I do is I always take my own notes. I mean, if I'm running a session, I mean, I just highly recommend. We've talked about AI moderation tools, and I really genuinely think there are a few that are pretty impressive. And it's a tool, a tool that should be in most teams' toolbox for certain scenarios. but I still encourage people to be part of sessions, both because there's value in being close to the customer and actually having that face time, making them feel like the humans behind the company care, that matters, and also because you see and hear things that aren't as obvious in a transcript. Like we were just talking about, the Gemini is getting kind of moving in that direction to be able to analyze some of that, but it's still not going to be the same as you being there. So I always try to myself, and also I encourage others to be in the sessions or watch a certain number of them after the fact to just be familiar with what's happening in them. And that's where you start building your own theories. Just in your subconscious, you start kind of creating little beliefs and hypotheses about what's going on. And I just jot those down and I consider them all super biased, but they're my perspective, right? So
Right.
AI is going to have its perspective.
Right.
And then I just have something to counter it in a lot of cases. So,
Yeah.
if I'm doing any analysis process, I don't sit down having no sense of what's in the data. Even if I haven't created the data myself, like with the Whoop stuff, I've combed through a percentage of it. I've kind of sampled it and then dug deep, looked at all the comments, the reviews we're dealing with, or kind of skimmed the interview transcript, or like scrabbled through some videos to try to catch like the points where someone went through some part of the experience or whatever, to just familiarize myself. And
Yeah.
then when AI goes, this is what's happening, I can go, I don't know. This is what I saw.
Yes. That is the point. That is the point is we're people are biased. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that you need to bring some bias into these. We're human, right? We're supposed to be biased. You can't
Yeah,
get rid of that.
it's
That's
part
actually
of
a
the
good,
deal.
it's part of the deal. But that is the point, is that you jot the notes down. You are there. I also want to emphasize the fact that marketers need to be there and be close to customers. You can't just like, oh, now there are tools out there. Great. I don't have to be close to
Yeah.
customers anymore. I'll just have the tool jump into the conversation. And then that is the wrong direction, my friends. Like there are companies that don't have like strong relationships with their customers, and that is unfortunate because the customers are, that's what I talk about on the show. Customers are such an important part of your company, who you're building this for, why you're even in business, and building those solid relationships so you can go back to them and say, hey, can I have a quick conversation? Or hey, can I check something with you, right? Like it, even if it's, in if you have that relationship and you're able to text, right? Hey, I'm about to get into this meeting and I was just curious, like there is some overlap here and I'm wondering, how do you think about this problem or idea or whatever? That is so valuable. Um, and I think that that's something that's missing in plenty of companies today. But that is the point that you just talked about. Um, we kind of touched on this. Like, if you're a B2B company doing customer research today, what is the thing that AI should do? And what is the thing that humans must do? I think you probably agree that, like, the human does the thing that they've always done, kind of like jot down notes, think about, just be there, right? And be part of that conversation, and at least be close to that customer, right? But then also double check with AI. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about, that like AI should do this and humans must do this?
I think there's just this really really human component that's missing if we are, especially if we're just a solo person working on something and then trying to fill in the gaps in our own work with AI. But also if you're working in a team and you're trying to just set up data pipelines and agents to do a bunch of stuff faster, the the decisions need to come from humans still. And to feed into the decisions, I think you need more kind of human to human time in your team. So even if I think back to when I was still working as an employee and in an office, just the water cooler conversations can be some of the most revelatory talking to an engineer about something that you heard in interviews and getting their pushback because they are, they're working on something where they were working with a data scientist who was telling them something else about what they're seeing behaviorally, those little bits and pieces feed into better decisions. So it's not just sit in your silo, program a set of scripts to run automatically with AI and
Right.
call it a day. Like, we're done, we're collecting faster than ever and analyzing faster than ever. You're kind of missing these unpredictable elements that can change the decision you make for the better if you
Yeah.
just kind of build this like single human to single bot relationship with everything.
And that's also a problem because we're not at the standing at the water cooler anymore. We're all at
Yeah,
home. Or not all of us, but plenty of us are at home and looking at our computer screen, and we're not bumping into people, serendipitous moments,
yeah,
talking about that one meeting and like, "Oh, that sparked an idea. Maybe I could," right? That's not happening as
yeah.
much anymore.
I mean, something I recommend to teams all the time, and I think it's one of the hardest things for teams to grab onto and say, yes, we'll do it. But it's one of the more meaningful things if you actually do implement it is for whatever number of hours of work you think you've saved with AI, just add one back that is a weekly or bi-weekly meeting with your team or between you and two people who have different roles or different functions in the company than you do to talk about customer knowledge and what you're doing with AI, kind of combine those things. If it's a research team, it's really easy because the team can just meet and talk about customers and AI in one go. If it's, if you're a marketer, I don't know, befriend someone in data science and an engineer, and then just talk about how you're setting up data pipelines and doing kind of quant analysis and also what you had heard from customers and what you're doing with messaging and things like that. But kind of merge the things and have an hour to just talk about stuff, bounce ideas, share perspectives. I think
I think
that
this should be a whole company thing. I don't think it should be just like, "Oh, you and a couple other people." Like I
it's
think whole
easier in a
companies.
small group, though. It's easier in a
Yeah.
small group because in a bigger group, certain voices will dominate the conversation. And I've always personally found it like I'm a small groups person, but I find it easier if you kind of make your friends in the other teams,
Yeah.
and then you just
True.
have a small group, then everyone's going to have something to share. Everyone will feel kind of open and able to discuss things, introverted, extroverted, ambivert, whatever you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
um, Things happen when you have like your point people rather than a whole group of people in a room.
I like that too. And I actually think that you can be even more valuable if you're kind of the one that kind of circles around the different small groups, gathers information, and kind of like, "Oh, I have knowledge that goes beyond just my little area here because I've talked to
Yeah,
this little group and that little group," and that builds your value as a marketer as well. Just
yeah,
speaking from like marketing perspective. Um,
yeah.
all right. We talked about a lot. I actually did want to ask you this question. How do you know when you have enough data to make a strategic decision versus when you're not ready yet? Like, okay, I have enough. I have enough and I can make this decision versus I don't have enough yet. Or now I'm just collecting more noise, like it's not helpful. How do you know?
I mean, there are terms for this, but I think you typically kind of reach a threshold at a certain point. Certain teams will always struggle with this, and I know people who have all the data in the world and still can't make a decision, right? But generally, I think you hit a certain threshold, like in research circles, people will say, yeah, at a certain point when you start hearing the same things over and over again, assuming you've done research pretty well and you haven't kind of botched the whole process, then that's a sign that you don't need to keep doing discovery. You've kind of
Yeah.
found enough data to lift the patterns, and then you see the patterns continue to repeat, so you're done.
Yeah.
Nothing new is kind of coming out of it.
I
But I
actually
think it
don't
really
think you need
depends.
Yeah, I actually don't think you need a lot of date. Like, I don't think you need to talk to a lot of people in B2B, especially. In B2C, it's a little different because it's like, hundreds of thousands of people that are buying like the waffles.
Yeah.
But in
If
B2B,
you're
it's, yeah,
if
go
your
ahead.
audience is the same, if you've segmented well and you're talking to the same type of role, whatever it is, and you keep hearing the same things, yeah, it will happen at 5, 10, 15 people
5, 10,
potentially. It's not
15.
always a lot.
Exactly, exactly. And even if your audience isn't the same, like there's nuances here and they're from this type of company and they, are using it in slightly, if you end up still hearing similar stuff across different types of customers, then you know that you're getting to like a good place to make strategic decision. So I,
Yeah.
I just wanted to get your take on that. I know you don't like to talk about favorite tools, but can you just name a couple of tools like that you really like in the research space? I just would everybody wants to know. The listener wants to know. I want to know like you deal with these tools, you experiment with them. What are your faves?
So favorites, I'm personally using Claude for pretty much everything at this point.
I love to
So
hear that because I do too. I found
yeah,
that Claude is just so like so much closer to the way that I think and operate.
yeah,
Right? I mean, I don't
yeah.
know. I haven't used as probably I've used a fraction of the tools that you've used, but I am happy with Claude in most cases.
I'm pretty happy with Claude too, especially because I find that it follows, when you have good instructions, it follows them quite well. All the models need a little bit of pushing here and there, and some of them more than others, but yeah, if you can kind of dial in your context and your prompting, then it can go a long way. So I'm using Claude Code at this point. um, Sitting in the terminal, I'm going to highlight for anyone listening who's like, I'm a designer or a marketer. That doesn't sound like fun to me. I am non-technical. I never taught myself how to code or anything exciting. So, like, that's, I am the same as those people. So, and I am somehow enjoying sitting in terminal for hours and talking to Claude there and getting it to run scripts. So it can be done. You can learn to enjoy it. So that's most of what I'm using right now. Other tools, there are so I don't remember where you're based. Are you in Europe or are you in the US?
No, I'm in the US. I'm
Okay,
in
so
Chicago.
cool. So I'm American, but I live in Europe and I have for many years. And so a lot of my clients are also European, and it's not that easy to find great AI companies with all of their, server options and data storage that's in the EU. So there's a company called Breta. I can send you the link for the show notes. They're in Norway and they store their data in Scandinavia, and I think that's pretty unique. They also do pretty decent analysis. So for a tool where you just kind of upload stuff and don't need to process and prompt and things yourselves, that's a good option. And for storage in the EU, then so for AI moderation tools, I worked with Maze on their AI tools. So I am biased, but and I also have not thoroughly tested all of their tools. But in terms of how I know that they were building their processes because I worked with them on them, they're like their heart is in the right place. And what I was seeing at that time when we were working together, like the results were really solid. Like going back to your like, I got 70 themes or
Insights.
insights and none of them are relevant. They were working very hard on that problem,
Okay.
trying to make sure that the insights that you get out are highly relevant, are verified, presented in the right order, even things like that. So I think that's a solid product. Um, AI moderation tools like Listen Labs consistently gets high marks from my clients. So not just kind of what I think is cool, but from the client teams that I've worked with where their standards were really high and they're
Yeah.
running complex multi-market research. Listen Labs was kind of getting the thumbs up from them. And what else can I say?
That
Um,
was already helpful.
that's a good mini toolkit already.
Yeah, that's already a great toolkit. I would talk to you for another hour, Caitlin, but
I
like
know.
I want to just be cognizant of
I would
time.
too, except that my toddler is calling. I can hear
Oh, yeah,
it.
my kids are home. It's too cold today, so my kids are home today. So I'm like happy that nobody was screaming or knocking on the door, like thankfully. Um, but yeah, I love this conversation. We didn't even talk about synthetic users. Can you believe it? Because that's
Next
like a
time.
whole
That's a
next
whole episode.
time. That's a whole episode, synthetic users. Any question for me? And if I don't have time to answer it now in this episode, I would love to just cover it in a separate like solo episode. Anything that's on your mind?
What would have to change for you to feel that AI is trustworthy?
Ooh, that's a great question. Let me think about it. Let me think about it because now from this episode, Caitlin, you put the onus on me to help me trust AI more based on my prompting. It's a skill. It's a skill, and I can't just be like, oh, that sucked. You are a bad tool, right? It's a
Well, you can,
relationship.
but
I can and I have, but I shouldn't,
you can
right?
also be proactive.
I can be more proactive, I think. So that's a great question. I will ruminate on it and I will have a solo bonus episode on it. But Caitlin, you have been so great. You're just like really cool and fun to talk to and have done a lot of really cool work in the space. So if anybody wants to find Caitlin, she is on LinkedIn, Caitlin D. Sullivan. And if you want to take her course, she's got one going, AI Analysis for PM's course on Maven, and I'll include a link in the show notes. And I'm looking
There are
forward.
two versions, actually,
Oh,
just so you know. There's a version for researchers and designers, and there's a shorter version for PMs, just
nice.
depending
Okay.
on who's listening. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I'm actually, you told me that maybe there's going to be one for marketers coming up sometime this year.
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly.
Just
Because
trying
that's
not
your
to,
background, right? Weweren't you like
yeah.
doing marketing
Marketing,
before?
then design, then
Then,
focusing more on research, yeah. Which
yeah,
is why
yeah.
there's nothing in there that's technical.
Right, right. So awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. This was
Thank
wonderful,
you, Anna.
and good luck with your kiddos,
You too.
and have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks, Anna. Bye.